Hey guys, great to see you and welcome to Slide Guitar for Beginners. Now I've been wanting to do something like this for ages and I'm hoping that there's enough interest out there. Providing that there is, then we can follow this up with subsequent lessons and if we start where we should start at the very beginning, then we can work our way through, so eventually you're going to be playing some nice slide guitar. Okay, so that's the idea. As I say, your feedback is always really important to me and it does determine how I go forward with the lessons. So if this is something that you're really interested in, don't forget to make a comment down below and let me know about it, because as I say, I would really like to develop this course and help you with some slide guitar. Okay, so let's get started. Before we actually start playing and things like that, we need to think about a few different things. Now, maybe the best place to start is with the guitar. Now, if you only have one guitar, then obviously that's what you're going to use. Okay, so that's absolutely fine. But I also want to cover some options for those of you who might have a few more options, yeah? Now, ideally speaking, what would be really good for you to play slide guitar on is actually a very cheap kind of Japanese, Chinese guitar, something along those lines. And the size is important. So if that's an option for you and you can buy a second guitar solely for slide, then you don't need to spend a lot of money. You can just get something basic, as I say. It can be Chinese, Japanese. The important thing is the size and that the action isn't too low. Okay, so by that what I mean is that the strings aren't too close to the fingerboard. That's why if you have a great guitar like a Martin or a Taylor or one of those kind of makes, it's almost too good for slide guitar because the tones that they produce is very, very complex. And so, what you want is something, as I say, relatively cheap, big and boomy, and volume is very important with slide guitar. Okay, but like I say, if all you have is one guitar, you can go with that. It's not a problem. If you can get a second guitar, get something big with a relatively high action. Now, if you buy something or you've got something and the action isn't too high, I can't really show you on this guitar, but on a standard guitar, you will have seen my other guitars, yeah, like a standard acoustic, it has like the bridge. And sometimes you can just put a few shims underneath the bridge. So you can just cut something out the same shape as the little slot on your bridge and put them under, and that can raise the action a little bit. So there are a few things that you can do, and I'm sure there are lots of videos all over YouTube which will kind of help you raise your action a little bit on the guitar. So that's what we're thinking about in terms of the guitar itself. Yeah, hopefully that's a little bit of help to you. I mean, obviously a resonator's great. If you've got a resonator, then all the better. You can pick resonators up relatively cheap. There are quite a few companies who make them, for just a few £100. I think Gretsch is one of them. This isn't a terribly expensive slide that I'm using here. It's an Ozark, and I've used those in the past. They make nice guitars. I generally, if I buy a guitar at that kind of price, then I'll take it to my luthier and he'll set it up for slide. So that might be something you want to consider as well. Okay, so then moving on to the strings, they're important too. And what you'll find is if you have very light strings on, like extra lights, they're going to sound pretty weedy and thin. And that's not something that you want when you're playing slide. You want something, as I've pointed out, nice and loud and boomy. So you might like to try some medium gauge strings. That'd be a great starting place because they'll bring a lot of volume to the mix, and that will really help along with a large bodied guitar. So all these things that we're doing are enhancing the volume, all right, and the resonance of everything. So my advice would be to try and, put some mediums on your guitar, and then you're going to get plenty of volume, yeah. If that's a little bit hard on your fingers and a little bit too heavy, then drop it down a gauge. Maybe try some custom lights, although you could find those a little bit on the light side, okay? And like everything that I'm going to tell you today, it's all open to experimentation. None of this is written in stone. This is just meant to be a rough guide to help you get started, yeah? So, next thing we can think about is whether or not to use picks. So some people use metal picks, plastic picks, There are lots of different varieties of these things, and generally speaking, for slide guitar, what you're going to find is that the main three fingers that you're using on the right hand are going to be your thumb, your index finger, and your middle finger. Okay, so you kind of, if you're thinking along the pick route, then you're only going to need three. All right, it's pretty rare that this ring finger comes into the equation, right? So I would, and in fact, many great bluesmen just use the thumb and the index finger. So this is something that I can't really say definitively what you should do. It's just a question of trial and error. Now, picks will bring volume to the equation, which is what I was saying is kind of important when it comes to slide guitar. But you should still be able to produce a decent volume without picks, just using your fingers. Personally, I don't use picks. I kind of like the sound that they produce in a sense, because they give a slightly harder sound, but I've never really gotten along with them brilliantly well. So it's not something, I've really followed with any real seriousness. I find I get by just with my fingers. But like I say, it's a good idea to try these things out and see what works for you. All right, so we can use our fingers or we can use the picks, as I mentioned. So the next thing is probably one of the biggest things, and that's the actual bottleneck itself. Now, there are so many varieties of bottlenecks out there. The typical ones are glass, brass, steel. Okay, so they're the ones that are probably the most common. Now, there are so many DIY things you can do in terms of bottleneck. I've seen people use screwdrivers, metal bars, pieces of copper pipe, the little fittings that you get on the socket sets for your car. They have a nice kind of heavy feel, and a lot of people tend to think that the heavier the slide, the better. All of these things that we've looked at so far are about producing volume, yeah? So big guitar, heavy strings, finger picks, heavy bottleneck. You're ticking all the boxes if you go down that route. But having said that, because there are so many different types of slide, then you really need to try them out. You don't really want to be taking potluck, just ordering one online or something like that, because until you've tried them all, it's difficult for you to make an informed decision. So my advice to you would be to go to a guitar store when it comes to actually choosing a bottleneck, because there are so many variables. Okay, so you've got the actual length of the slide will vary. There are some short ones, there are some longer ones, there are some thin ones, some thicker ones. As I say, there's all the different materials. They've now started kind of making slides in wood as well. In fact, the one I use more often than not is the ebony one, which Taylor make. I find that quite a nice one. But I have used all sorts of things, so if you possibly can, try and go to a guitar store, because you really won't beat that. You're going to have the opportunity to hide away in a corner somewhere, take a few of the bottlenecks with you, and just spend 10-15 minutes just going through the options, and then of course you're going to make a much better decision at the end of the day. Now, if you're in a position where you're a little bit nervous about going out because of the current situation, or it's difficult for you to get out, then I guess your hand is forced and you have to maybe take a chance on ordering something online. And really, I think you should just, take a chance. I suppose glass and a heavy steel or brass is maybe a good first option to try. You may have a bottle at home and you can break off the top of that and give that a shot before you commit yourself. There are so many options, guys, really. But like I say, you really just need to try them to, have any real chance of knowing what suits you best. That would be my advice with regard to the slide itself. So when it comes to which finger we place the slide on, there are only a few options, really. It's going to be your little finger or your ring finger. I guess there are some people out there who put it on the middle finger, and like I say, the rules are there to be broken. If that's what works for you, then that's fine. But one thing to bear in mind here and not forget about is that some of the slide songs that you might learn will require you fretting certain chords or doing some fretting. Now, obviously, if the slide is on your middle finger, it only leaves that index finger to play actual notes. So my advice, I guess, would be to just start off with your middle and your ring finger and see how that works for you. I think that's probably a good starting point, yeah? Okay, so I did just want to touch on all of those things which I feel are important, right? Before we get started on the actual playing and things, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, and if they haven't, covered slide before, some of those things might be useful to know before you get started.